morning. I am Marius Botha from Marius Botha Consultants, and I'm welcoming you today at this session that we're going to present. I've got my co-presenter with me, Danae Oosthuizen from the Vet Oosthuizen Incorporated Attorneys, and I will explain the procedure, how we're going to work a little bit later. More about Marius Botha Consultants. We are in business already for 5 years, and if I say we're in business, we're in school management business, assisting more than 150 schools continuously regarding various challenges that schools do experience from time to time. We specialize in school management, as said, but also we attend to staff management because a great component of school staff are employed by the SGB and not by the department, so there is a different format of legislation applicable to them. We also do training and development, we do policy formulation, and we do legal advice, and we also do assistance with legal matters, even in litigation processes. So those are the services that we render, and then we also do have a 24/7 telephone line available to people who can phone us at any time when they experience a problem. It doesn't matter which time of the day or which day in the week. We are available for that. Should you want to know more about our services, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can also visit our website available, or you can phone myself, Marius Botha, 082 922 7503. The numbers will also be made available later during the session. Today's session, we're going to attend specifically to SGB, school governing bodies, frequent questions that we are asked, to highlight certain issues and to give you the answers relating to those specific questions. We are going to do it as follows. We're going to ask Danae to ask the questions to me that we frequently are posed to, and then I will answer that to the best of my knowledge and also give you the references where you can go and look it up in the legislation where it is available. Lastly, I just want to come back to Marius Botha Consultants and the Vet Oosthuizen Incorporated. We are working in association, and we are actually one team. And because we are combining our knowledge, experience, and expertise, we are actually a very formidable team. Because in the Vet Oosthuizen, we do have people that are well qualified in law, contract law, in labor law, and also we do have a litigation specialist. And then on Marius Botha Consultants, we've got policy formulators, people specializing in disciplinary hearings for staff and learners, and a lot of knowledge and experience regarding SGB functions and school management issues. That's the whole team. To start off the process, I'm going to hand over to Danae.
Marius, please tell us why this is a very important time for school governing bodies.
School governing bodies who's in charge of schools and school principals and school staff does not only have the COVID to handle. The COVID is a great lot of challenges on the school grounds these days. But we are approaching a school governing body election early in 2021. The expectation was that these elections would take place during March this year. However, I know there are certain role players that start thinking and discussing and suggesting that we should move it to April. Nevertheless, this is the second biggest election in the country. After the national election, school SGB elections is the biggest election that takes place in South Africa. There are regulations promulgated by the Minister of the Department of Basic Education. We are still waiting for that, and that will clarify the time frame within which it should take place. What does it make it more important for schools? Well-functioning SGBs are guaranteeing that you will have a well-functioning school. If you have a SGB that's dysfunctional or not functional at all, you will find that schools cannot function. So it's very important, and parents must go and think about this, and even people from the community, because the learners with special education needs, they can co-opt with voting right, people from the community with specific expertise. Parents and these people interested in this must make themselves available to the schools and get themselves nominated so that we can get an effective, knowledgeable team with a various lot of skills. That will promote the school in your community. That school's interest. We hope it happens with every school.
Can you please give us a brief explanation of how the election process works?
Yes, Danae. Section 28 of the South African Schools Act has got a specific determination how should elections take place for school governing bodies and who must be elected and who can serve on it. However, every province has got its own regulations that explains that section of the Act much more. So we need to look at the regulations and wait for regulations in every province to do that. But the main issues regarding is that there has to be a notice to parents and there will be a time frame for that. There will have to be a time frame for nominations to be taken place, a meeting date for where the parents will meet and elect the SGB members has to be established. Right. There will be also a person in control of this voting process. That's usually a neighboring school's principal that will be. This is a democratic election. So people will have to accept the nomination, right? They have to be there and then they can be elected. And this process more or less takes more or less from start to beginning at least 21 days, 3 weeks. I'm not going to read the Act to you, and not the regulations, because the regulations must be published. But the people can go and look at the Act. But in a nutshell, establish a meeting date, nomination date, accept the nominations, hand it in, and then attend the session where you have to be present. And when we look at the regulations, the talents and the regulations from province to province differs regarding quorum. What is the quorum that should be there? There's also about proxies, appointing somebody that can vote on your behalf, and there's various other factors that the regulations determine regarding who must be present. Is a departmental person going to be part? They're going to act as observer, and what is happening specifically if we look at Poppy now. How long are the documentation thereafter going to be kept? And those things or issues should be clarified in the regulations. So that's in a nutshell what does SGB elections entail.
So Marius, what should schools start considering to cater for COVID-19 protocols while still ensuring a fair and proper SGB election?
Yes, as stated earlier, COVID is a challenge for every school, and it's going to be a challenge during the SGB elections. And however, currently the legislation and the regulations are quite about how to handle COVID. So I would see, and I think this is what's going to happen, that's my prediction that's going to happen, that there will be elections available on an e-platform. And there will be a procedure in the regulations stating that schools can apply, and they will have to ensure then that the process is democratically correct. I think it must be audited and be available for auditing to ensure that should we have any queries about that after the election, that it can be answered and be proven to be an objective and democratic situation. So, yes, I don't think we're going to be able to gather in a hall or on a rugby field this great number of people that all want to vote, and we're handling the election paper and the voting roll, and everybody must count this. This is going to be a challenge to follow all the protocols. So I can foresee that there will be availability of an e-platform. However, certain schools that won't have those resources will have to follow the old procedure by hand, and their protocols will have to be published as part of the regulations from the government.
What acts and regulation govern school governing bodies?
The starting in the beginning and the end would be the South African Schools Act. There is no ways that you will be able to function as a school governing body if you don't have a thorough knowledge about every regulation or part of the South African Schools Act. From 1 to, I think, 64, you'll have to read these different articles published in the Act. Then certain of them would be of more importance. That is true. But you have to have a knowledge about the whole South African Schools Act. Furthermore, the regulations that are referred to for the election will be of great knowledge, that you have to do that to ensure that, the regulations also clarify not only the election, it clarifies the functioning and thereafter. And then in the South African Schools Act, every HGB must have a code of conduct, and it must be drawn up by themselves. So that's the rules of the game that they want to apply within themselves. It's compulsory to do that. And I think every HGB member must make himself aware of what is in part of that code of conduct. Otherwise, it might lead to conflict within the HGB. And that can lead to a dysfunctional HGB, leading to a dysfunctional school. We also have the Employment of Educators Act, specifying the role, what HGB's role is in the appointment of educators. There's a clear process that they have to follow to recommend educators to be appointed at the schools where they serve. So you have to have a knowledge about that. And then we move to, in Gauteng, we've got Circular 74 of 2007 and General Notice 259 of 2001 that says to you regarding disciplinary hearings, because disciplinary hearings are conducted by the SGB and they fall under the SGB. But we also have various other circulars and other regulations that's been published that has an influence on SGBs. And this is like a living book rolling out, because the department creates these documents continuously. So you will never get to an end and say, this is A to Z. It's the SGBs is in a dynamic situation, keeping up with everything. But those are the bigger parts of the legislation that will have a serious effect on the functioning.
Okay. How is a school governing body structured?
Then SGBs are structured differently regarding high schools and primary schools. In high schools, you will find 5 components. Let's look at the 5. It's a parent component. How many parents can be elected is determined by the law in the Act, stating that should you have a certain amount of learners, you can elect 5 parents, and it goes up to a maximum of 9 parents that you can elect. But it depends on the learner number in your school. The second component is the educators component, where you find that educators are elected to represent them. Furthermore, PS staff, more the admin people, has also to have to a democratic election, elect somebody to serve on them. The principal is always an ex officio, so there's no choice, he has to be a member. And then you have in the high schools, you do have learner representatives, where at least 3 learners are part of the SGB. You can still then have co-opted members, but co-opted members are usually without voting rights, unless it is to increase the parent component to 1 more than the rest. Then that person has got voting rights. Primary school has all the same components, but not a learner representative council. They don't have that. If we look at learners with special educational needs schools, they do have all of these components, but they have a great variety of options where they can co-opt people from business with people with expertise, parties that can contribute to the school, and they can get them with voting rights. They can co-opt them with voting rights. So that's the components of the SGB that can play a role and must play a role in terms of legislation. Co-opting is not compulsory for ordinary schools. However, it is feasible to do so to get knowledge and skills where you don't have it in your elected people.
Is there any compulsory positions in the school governing body?
Then, yes. The school governing body must have a chairperson, and the chairperson must be elected by the SGB, not by the parents at the night where they elect SGB members, but the SGB usually directly after that meeting will gather, and they will elect the SGB chairperson, who has to be a parent. The second position that is a statutory position is there must be a treasurer. The treasurer becomes responsible for the finances of the school and the records of the school, and it will work closely with the principal. So that's your second position that's compulsory, and that person has to be a parent member. Then you have a secretary, and the secretary can either be a parent member or it can be any other member from PS staff or educators to be appointed as secretary. That's not compulsory to be a parent member. Those 3 are the compulsory positions that you would have. A lot of HGBs, when they are big, say 9 parent component and a big school component of 8 or 7, and you amount to 16, 17 people, they do choose a deputy chairperson. But it's not compulsory. You don't have to do that. If the chairperson is not available, the treasury would act actually as the chairperson. And it is also then that the secretary, the treasurer, the chairperson, and the principal forms the exco. And the exco has got certain decision-making rights that they can exercise, but then it has to be referred back for that the SGB approves those decisions. But it's usually emergencies, like, for instance, if you have an athletic meeting and the sound system doesn't work and there are 7 schools present and you have to buy one, then the EXCO can do that, and they will have to motivate the decision then at a SGB at a later stage.
Maurice, is there any compulsory committees that a school governing body should have?
Yes, Danae, as previously mentioned, the previous question, you have an EXCO, and that is a statutory appointment, and there has to be an EXCO in terms of the regulations. If you look at the South African Schools Act, you also do have to have a financial committee, which is very, very important, because they've got to see that the finances, because you work with parents' money, are spent in the correct manner and also managed in the correct manner, and they must be able to supply evidence of every cent spent by the school. And that's the bottom line. So you need a financial committee who also have to look at exemptions if people do apply for exemption of paying school fees. So those are the 2 compulsory. Other committees will depend on the school's needs. You get with the bigger schools very into sport, that you would get a sport committee, you can get a marketing committee, you can get a committee for a new building project or fundraising, but that is committees, and it's the choice of the schools to establish those committees. It is a problem, however, because every committee must be headed by an elected SGB member. So you only have a limited amount of SGB members. So if you go big and you have plenty of committees, you would find that the SGB people are so occupied by serving in these committees that they get frustrated and they don't perform then very well.
Maurice, who is responsible for formulating school policies? And are there any specific school policies that public schools must adopt?
Yes, Danae, I think we must make a distinction between professional activities, which is controlled and in charge and falls under the principal, while on the other hand, governance issues falls under the SGB. In Section 15 of the South African Schools Act, the SGB is a juristic person. So it's a legal person like myself and you, and it's compulsory that they, for managing the school, has to draw up policies. Like in corporate companies, they draw up, it has to. However, the school environment's different, so if you read the Act, and it's not pinpointed in a list and say these are, but you've got to read the South African Schools Act, and then you will find the following. Firstly, they do have to have a financial policy. Secondly, they have to have a policy on religion. There's got to be an admissions policy, there's got to be a language policy, and there has to be a code of conduct. Those are non-negotiables, and the department actually requests in the beginning of every year that the schools should at least apply those 5 policies to that. Further policies depends on the needs of the school and the SGB. You get schools that's got 110 policies, you've got other schools that's got 35 policies. Why would you draw up a policy? It would be to guide you, to make decisions, to protect you, right? And to clarify certain issues about what's rights and responsibilities. Those would the reasons be. So whenever an issue comes up, think about the policy. Do you really need one? Yes, it's not a nice to have. If you need it, then draw up a policy. Maurice Botha Consultants can play a big role because we've got one person dedicated only in writing policies and making them tailor-made for your specific school according to your needs.
What is the core functions and responsibility of school governing body members?
The core functions can be summarized, Danae, into a very short sentence. The SGB's member must serve the interests of the school at all times. Number 2, must support the principal and all the staff in the execution of their duties. And whenever a decision has to be taken, the children's interest must always come first. Thereafter, you can deviate with different function responsibilities. He has to attend every SGB meeting as far as possible, because after being absent without excuse from 3 SGB meetings, he will be kicked out of the SGB in the 4th meeting. Furthermore, they must handle everything that they discuss in it confidential. So you can summarize it, but if they act in the interest of the school, so whenever is this the SGB function, how should I perform it? If it's the interest of the school, it is your function. It's got no time and date set limit. You've got to do it whenever you need it to act on behalf in the interest of the school and support the principal and support the educators and the learners in whatever they do. There's no place for personal interest. You should not be serving in the SGB if you've got a hidden agenda of maybe promoting my own child or other children, or I have got a specific issue with an educator and I want to address it. The SGB is not the forum for that. Then you should stay and address it on another channel, seek another way of finding a solution, but don't be elected in the SGB with a hidden agenda to approach the people.
Boris, when is the school governing body in control of the school?
The school governing body is in control of the school while there's a SGB meeting taking place. Then they're in the position to formulate policies. They can make decisions, they can dish out work, they can make certain suggestions or listen to proposals, discuss them, do strategic planning for the future, discuss strategic plans for the school. That's very important. How do we take the school a step higher? Let's grow. Let's continue on a good path that we are. But the moment when the SGB meeting is dissolved and the people go home, then the principal stays behind and he's in charge of the school. And that means that all the decisions, all the policies that's been formulated, he will bring it to the school and he becomes the CEO of the company. He's got to see that everything is implemented, goals are achieved. He's got to communicate to the staff. But you often find that SGB people think because they're elected in the SGB, they're in charge of the school the whole time. That's not. They only when there's a meeting. Thereafter, they become normal parents, unless they are called to the school for a financial committee meeting or an exco committee meeting. Then they come back, and then the SGB is actually in charge for that meeting. But when the meeting ends, it's handed over to the principal. So the principal is 99% of the time in charge of the school, not the SGB. So in a nutshell, that causes a lot of problems in schools. When the SGB oversteps the boundaries, they don't keep themselves to governance, but they start interfering in the professional matters of the principal. And that leads to huge problems and court cases, as we've recently experienced.
May an individual SGB member act on behalf of the school governing body?
Yes, Danae, he or she can, but on condition that there was a decision taken at a SGB meeting, a formal and it's minuted, or a resolution has been passed mandating an individual to act on behalf of the SGB. But an SGB member cannot act on behalf of the SGB if he's not been mandated by an SGB meeting where there was a quorum present. And we often bump into problems that SGB members think they can start wheeling and dealing on behalf of the SGB, and then they don't have the mandate to do so. And they will be liable, if cost secure, in person for that, because they're acting like in business, you're acting on behalf of your employer or a big corporation, right, without being mandated. They're going to laugh at you. They're not going to accept your responsibilities. It's your problem that. So make sure that if you want to act on behalf of SGB, that there's a resolution, there's a decision taken, and that you are mandated specifically for that.
Can a school governing body member receive compensation?
The South African Schools Act says a SGB member can be compensated for direct costs incurred for performing his duties. And if we say performing his duties, is actually a duty or a task given by the SGB. But for anything else, he cannot be compensated. This creates a problem because we had a school where the person was serving in Pretoria, Tshwane, on a school governing body, but working in Kimberley. And whenever there was a SGB meeting, he would fly up, and then the school was charged for the flying costs. That's not fair. I am of the opinion that if you are elected for a SGB, you should not claim transport to hence and forth. Only when the SGB appoints you to go and do a specific task and you've got to travel 100 kilometers to go and look at a possible vehicle for the school to buy, that is a cost and that's a duty that you perform, but you've been mandated to do so. But usually when you travel from work and your meeting starts at 6 o'clock, on your way home you stop at the school. I don't believe you should be able to claim kilometers. That would be unfair and it would not be an expenditure that you should actually approve. You should only be able to claim. You also get professional people working for SGBs. They can be reimbursed for their professional duties, but then Section 26 of the South African Schools Act says when it's discussed who's going to be the service supplier, that person will have to excuse himself on such a meeting and he may not participate and he may also not have information that he should not have that makes it easy for him to make a bid or a tender. He should not have any access to information that can create a benefit for him.
Marius, what can happen if one SGB member works against the rest of the SGB to serve his or her own interests?
Danae, the answer here lies in the code of conduct drawn up by the SGB that every person serving in the SGB must accept. They must sign it and they accept the rules of the game. And what is lacking, what we see in code of conduct, is there's no form of dispute resolution. So there should be a dispute resolution included in the codes of conduct of SGBs, meaning to say, if there's a problem experienced with somebody, how are we going to first deal with it in the SGB? Are we going to investigate it? What can we do? What can we do? Remember, you cannot remove this person from the SGB. Only the HOD can actually remove this person. So your dispute resolution will say, let's change the behavior and get the person back. What would typical incidents be like? If this person is destructive regarding hampering the processes within the SGB, you would opt for that. Or if the person is not acting in the interest of the school, bad-mouthing the school outside, making comments, defaming the school's good name, you will act against him, right? And then you can start a procedure in terms of your code of conduct. And I think if you followed the procedure and then there's a recommendation to the HOD to remove the person from the SGB, and that has happened, then you will be successful in that, and then you're acting in the interest of the school and the learners.
Marius, how should confidential information, which can include financial information, be dealt with in the school governing body?
When an SGB member accepts to be nominated and he's been elected, and part of the code of conduct is that he signs an oath of confidentiality, because you will be exposed to very personal information of parents, but also from the school side. And part of that is the school finances. And you will have to be secretive about that and only share it with your own SGB members during an SGB meeting. We've bumped into various problems that SGB members went out of the SGB and starts mentioning figures of the school and basically inciting people to ask questions. That's disloyal. It's not in the interest of the school. You should speak it out and follow the dispute procedure within your school governing body to solve these matters. But information has to be dealt with very confidential, which is dealt there. And the POPI Act also comes in now. And that's why nomination forms and the oath that you will sign and the code of conduct that will be signed will have to be changed, and it will have to include the determinations of the POPI Act regarding the confidentiality of people and information that you have within the SGB.
Do school fees fall under the consumer protection legislation, and further, are schools bound to the Public Finance Management Act?
Danai, we've got to distinguish between public schools and independent schools. Public schools does not fall under the Consumer Protection Act because school fees for public schools are a statutory payment. It's determined by law in the Schools Act, and that there was a general parents meeting where it's budgeted and everybody agrees, and then it becomes a statutory payment. You have to do that. Independent schools do fall under the Consumer Protection Act, and what is very important there is to look at the contract at admission of a learner and what is responsibility, because if that contract is not formulated correctly, it can cause huge problems for debt collection or even under school fees collection. If we go to the Public Finance Management Act, public schools do not fall under the Public Finance Management Act. I know the departmental officials goes to schools and says you fall under it. It's not true. If you go and read the definitions of who on which institutions the Public Finance Management Act is applicable, schools are not part of that. And secondly, schools would like to fall under the Public Finance Management Act in a lighter view, because if they then have shortfalls like the majority of schools do have now with COVID, they can apply for Treasury to be reimbursed therefore. So it would have helped schools if they can apply to Treasury, but they're not falling under the Public Finance Management Act. The only part that can be linked to the Public Finance Management Act, but they're not falling under the Act, is the grant that schools are getting in May and November annually based on the learner number from the department. But there it's very prescriptive how it should be. It's ring-fenced and it may only spent in a certain manner, and that's binding on all schools. But and generally schools don't have a problem with that.
What is meant with Section 21 functions?
Section 21 functions is a part of the South African Schools Act that schools can apply to inherit those functions. This is following, we've got to go way back in history, because we had, before the political dispensation change, we had Model C schools. And Model C schools had the authority given over to the schools and the parents to administer funds and to buy and do certain things, and they were not strictly controlled by government. So when the new South African Schools Act were written in 1996, they pulled this in as Section 21 functions, where the SGB can apply to the HOD and the MEC for paying the fees for water and electricity, to pay for textbooks and charge it then over to the school fees. They can also insure the buildings. They can rent the buildings out to create an income. That's the bottom line of Section 21C functions, that they are actually managing the school in total. So often there's an argument, but why do we insure the school buildings? But the fact of the matter is, if a building is damaged, for instance, a roof is by a tornado coming over the school is removed, and you wait for the Department of Public Works to come and repair the school, it may take several years because it's not budgeted expenses for. So in that instance, that's why we insure school buildings. And that's why we wanted this right, so that that building can be, which damage can be repaired as quickly as possible in the best interest of the learners and the school. And we had in Krugersdorp recently, 2-3 years ago, typical examples of this, and the value of that insurance was immense in that situation. We also need insurance for liability. If children get injured, or parents get injured, or people get injured on school grounds, there is a claim. The claim is first against the school. And when the school insurance has a shortfall, then the department becomes responsible for the rest.
How can the school ensure financial independence?
Yeah, this is a challenge for all schools these days with, not being able to get all the school funds in, and donors and sponsors are not frequently available. And this is a SGB function. SGB function must go and plan and do a strategic planning. How can we create a permanent income stream for the school to contribute to the well-being of the school? Because raising funds these days are a difficult situation. But the government cannot supply enough funds to run schools. It's impossible. We've got 24,000 schools in the country, more or less, and about 22,000 of them are quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools. So they're totally relying on the government to supply them for funding. Then we've got about more or less 2,500 schools outside this, and we call them quintile 4 and 5, and they need to raise their own income, because if they have shortfalls, they cannot run to the government. They cannot claim subsidy. They cannot hand over the problem to the government. So to gain financial independency, you will find that SGBs has got to make plans to create a permanent income stream to enhance the financial position of the school constantly. That's the biggest challenges in the future for SGBs of quintile 4 and 5 schools.
Maurice, can I serve on more than one SGB?
Yes, Danae. Any parent member can serve on as many SGBs as he wishes to. The problem is time will catch up with you. We often find that a person serves on an SGB of a primary school and on a high school. It is very valuable if the person can make contributions to both, and he's got children in both schools. It's an asset to the school. But you can serve on more than one SGB, and you can serve in different capacities. It doesn't matter. You can.
What is the SGB's role in terms of exemptions and then the annual general meeting?
Now let's start with the meetings. SGB, it's compulsory for SGB to call an annual general meeting where there's annually a budget approved for the next year. That usually takes place during September, October, November. It must be finished by November, because you've got to inform the parents about next year's school fees and all that. So it's compulsory. The SGB doesn't have a choice. During that AGM, there is certain information that has to be shared with the parents. So in normal, there is 6 resolutions, decisions that has to be taken. And regarding exemptions, it must be made public to all parents that should they not be able to pay, or the conditions that in their personal environment changes, that they have the right to apply for exemptions. If they apply for exemptions, the law has got regulations on it, right, stating exactly which documents should be handed in. You cannot just pitch at the school and say, I can't pay. You've got to apply. And the school SGB has got a financial committee that will sit then with your forms, if it's all there and it's complete, and they cannot do thumb sucking. In the regulations, there's a specific formula that they have to apply. And then they will apply that formula, and you can either then be granted total exemption, or 30 or 40 or partially exemption, or no exemption after that. Should you not be happy with that, then you have the authority to appeal to the MEC of the province regarding how the school applied it. But fact of the matter is, any parent in a public school that cannot pay school fees has the right to apply for exemption, but following the right procedures.
What is the relationship between the school governing body and the learners?
The learners of the school is linked to the SGB, but in different angles. The SGB has got a responsibility to always act in the interest not only of every learner, but the total group of learners in the school and at a whole. So they have that responsibility. Secondly, through policy formulation, for instance, the disciplinary procedure, the code of conduct of learners, there's got search and drug testing, all of these together, there's policies that's got to be formulated. And the majority of these policies falls under the SGB. And that will guide you how to have disciplinary hearings, because that's also prescribed in the regulations. For instance, in public schools in Gauteng, you've got to have a tribunal, 3 SGB people representing the SGB sitting in a hearing. The principal cannot sit as chairperson in the hearing. He can act as the initiator, because the Act states clearly that the initiator must be a qualified educator. Can drug testing be done? The SGB does not have knowledge about this, because this is delegated to the principal, and the Act states clearly in the regulations that the principal or his delegate can test a child when there is evidence of suspicion that he might be under the influence of a substance. They may be searched, right? But what's important there is the prescribed procedure in the legislation. And that's often where we bump into problems, where schools don't follow the correct procedures. If the child then are found being most probably, or there's allegation that he is guilty of serious misconduct, then the matter gets referred to the SGB. And the SGB must then handle the disciplinary hearing. But again, must be in the best interest of the learner. And in extreme situations, SGBs can recommend learners for temporary suspension or for expulsion. And if a child is a serious threat to other children, then in terms of Section 9, the SGB can then suspend a child as a proactive measure, that they're protecting the rights of other learners in that. But the procedures are very much prescribed, and the SGB can only follow that. If they follow those procedures, they are actually, in fact, acting in the best interests of the learners.
Marius, there's still so many questions that I can ask you relating to various school governing body aspects. Is there anything that you would just like to say in concluding this training?
Yes, obviously we can have a discussion for a whole week regarding SGB issues, but due to time constraints, I think we touched on the most important issues. But we, as Maurice Botha consultants, understand there are more questions, and that's why we are regularly presenting training sessions. For instance, we do have training sessions on Section 38A. That's important for SGBs, that they've got to take note if they wish, and there are funds available to pay an educator employed by the government some additional funds. Section 38A, it can get tricky, and we have to look at that specifically. Furthermore, contracts of employment. The SGBs in quintile 4 and 5 schools are 50% sometimes at schools employers, so they employ 50% of the staff. Those contracts do have pitfalls, and grade R schools, where we go to primary schools where you get a stipend, so there are actually 2 people paying the salary. It's the government and the SGB for a top-up. That is challenging, so we do present various training courses, Section 38A, on contracts of law, contracts of employment. We're looking specifically at grade R. We're also looking at possible options for financial independence, guiding schools, teaching them what are success stories of others. But visit our website and you'll find all the other training courses there, and follow our Facebook and you will find it there. And we will, after we've concluded the next month's training sessions, we will also load these training sessions on YouTube, and it will be available to schools.
Thank you very much, Marius. And we would also like to thank all of you for joining us today. We really look forward to hear from you, as well as to work with you in this year.
Now, from my side, I would ask the schools come and join hands with us. We've got different packages. We can discuss it with you. We're negotiable. Contact us, phone us. We would like to help your school grow, and we would like to assist you in all matters that you cannot handle on your own and you need some expertise. We are available and looking forward to meeting you.